I think we're good. If we did miss you, feel free to put that in the chat, and we will get you those privileges. Dick, I just got your message, so I'll figure out what happened there. There you go. All right, so thank you for bearing with us on that. I am going to turn it over to Jason Miner in our office. Jason.
Thanks, Liz, and thank you all. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you all to this briefing for the press, and I believe that in some cases it's being streamed for the public as well. So welcome. I am Jason Miner. I'm the Natural Resources Policy Director for the Office of the Governor, for Governor Kate Brown. And thanks so much for taking this time out of your day. This briefing is really is something that we've done for several years in a row now. It is meant to be an early season briefing to give you the opportunity to know the people, to put faces to names, and to know the agencies that operate statewide during fire season. These agencies operate in a complete and coordinated system, as you will hear today, but it is important as the fire season evolves that the media is able to reach out to the right agency, to understand interrelationships between agencies, to understand the people that you're talking to, and who plays what role within as fire season evolves. So what follows here today over the course of the next hour is each of these agencies, which have a tremendous amount of expertise in fire season, identifying their roles, their responsibilities, the context to help you stay in contact. And then, as Liz mentioned, we'll follow up with a Q&A at the end of the hour. It will reflect a complete and coordinated system between the agencies, but I also want to take this opportunity to say that the press is part of that complete and coordinated system in getting messages out to the public and informing the public, and in coordinating and cooperating with our state agencies as we approach challenging fire seasons. And I think the last thing that I want to reference is that as in years past, life safety is the #1 priority. Life safety is our paramount priority during fire season, and having you well informed as to the state agencies that work on these issues, as well as contributing to getting messages out to the Oregon public, is critical in keeping life safety #1 on the list of priorities. With that, I'll hand it off to my colleague in the governor's office, Constantine Severe.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Constantine Severe. I am the governor's public safety advisor. And in my role, I get to work pretty closely with the Oregon Department of Forestry, the State Fire Marshal's Office, and Department of the Office of Emergency Management. I don't really have too much to add besides that the governor's really proud of the work that the state agencies that were in kind of tip of the spear last year in our very difficult fire season. The governor has the highest confidence in the leadership of the agencies, as well as the hard work that the folks in the agencies do in, day out. And so I will pass it on to Doug Graff at the Oregon Department of Forestry.
Okay, good afternoon all, and could we kick open the first slide, please? My name is Doug Graff. I serve as Chief of Fire Protection for the Department of Forestry, and echo my colleagues, really appreciate the relationship and all you do to get critical information out to Oregonians where it needs to be. And I always want to be available to help support that effort. See this as a team effort collectively, so always look forward to this event. Do we have the screen shared at this point? I'm not seeing it.
Bobby, we see that you're screen sharing, but we don't see the slides, so I'm not sure what's happening there. Just bear with us through this technical issue.
I'm working it from my end since we paused it on the beginning. It's wanting me to start over, so apologies.
Okay.
The fun of technology never ends, evidently.
Thanks, Bobby. I can kick into gear and we can catch up on the slides. The first slide that we'll touch will be the drought conditions. I don't think, which is any surprise to anyone here on the call, continued drought conditions in Oregon persist, really established in 2012, where we experienced close to 1 million acres burned in southeast Oregon in 2012, and those drought conditions spread across much of the state. So when we get to the slide deck, and you can see this clearly on the Oregon Drought Monitor, when you just type that into Google, you'll see that much of the state is in drought conditions, in particular, the east slope of the Cascades, south central Oregon, so the Klamath Lake country, and then southwest Oregon, Medford region, really is the bullseye relative to drought conditions, and that drives fire potential, as we'll see on future slides. We'll catch up on the slides again. We see, I'll speak to the temperature and precipitation potential over the next couple months. So really answering the question, does our weather conditions complicate the existing drought conditions? And the answer is yes. We're looking at hotter than normal temperatures over the next 3 months, according to the Weather Service, the National Weather Service. That's an easy find also. And you can see the state's and the nation's temperature projections there are above normal for much of the West, and of course Oregon. Below precipitation is also predicted in much of the West across Oregon. The reality of that prediction relative to precipitation is we historically do not have much precipitation July, August, and September. So below normal is concerning relative to the month we're in now, June, because that really propels us forward into an early fire season and not, which is what we've all been experiencing, and I think you all know that well. Would you like me to keep going on this slide deck, Liz?
Doug, we are going to see if maybe Yasmin can share her screen and get the PowerPoint up. I think that's going to be really helpful. So maybe we could just pause for 30 seconds while we get this working.
I'll come off mute briefly, Doug, if you'll allow me to interject into your portion of the presentation. Two things. One, I have put in the chat field the link. The Drought Monitor is a national drought monitor. You can all access it and keep track of it throughout the course of the summer. I put in the link to Oregon pulled out in particular. You'll notice 100% of the state is in some abnormally dry condition and 97% is in a drought condition. With that, I'll also just acknowledge what Constantine said. The governor deeply appreciates the frontline service of so many state employees and so many state agencies, contractors, et cetera, engaged in wildfire season. Back to you, Doug.
Thank you, Jason. You've been through enough of these briefings. Well done. Bobby, if we could start with the drought slide, and I'll just hit those quickly for a visual, that would be great. Okay, so there's the drought conditions that Jason just articulated in more detail. You can see the next slide is the temperature outlook, and the next slide is the precipitation outlook. And then what that leads us to is the fire potential risk projected out over the next 3 months. So the next slide is June, and you can see I spoke mostly to the east slope of the Cascades. We're looking at higher, above normal fire risk, but I'd also note that in the Southwest desert there in New Mexico, Arizona, that's where a lot of the resources are going now. They're seeing some challenging conditions, but as you see as the next slide, that risk really starts to move towards the Pacific Northwest in the next month of July, and then in the next month it's squarely, pushing into the Pacific Northwest, California, fully engulfed there with high risk. So this looks to be another challenging fire season. And the next slide suggests clearly that the data there supports that. And we've got a glitch there in the visual, so I'll highlight the data points for you. And this is ODF protected land. So our responsibility is 16 million acres, forest and grazing land and urban interface land across the state, across our 12 protection districts. And to date, this slide was produced, sequence and timing of this event earlier, but for today, statistics, we're approaching 300 fires to date, and that's well above, over 2 times our 10-year average on ODF protected lands, and we're just over 2,000 acres burned. And the acres burned is at 4 times our 10-year average. Our 10-year average for acres, numbers of fires and acres burned are closer today to 120 fires and 480 acres. So I'll repeat that. We're close to 300 fires responded to and 2,000 acres burned. Our 10-year average year to date on ODF protection is 120 fires, around 480 acres. So that's 2 times the numbers of fires and 4 times the number of acres burned. So everything we see there leading up to a difficult season is upon us. I turn to State Fire Marshal Mariana Ruiz-Temple to speak about some urban interface fires that we've already experienced to date and what we think is coming.
Thank you, Doug. My name is Mariana Ruiz-Temple and I serve as the State Fire Marshal. And I think the importance of this slide is to show and illustrate that we are looking at fires in a different way this year, really from a year perspective versus a fire season. We saw significant fire at the local level with an early fire season, or early this season, March, which marked a level 3 evacuation of 182 homes. And that signifies where we are in terms of fuels and conditions. We've seen 3 fires to date in Klamath that threatened structures, the Milepost 85 fire yesterday. And these are all fires of that complete coordinated system of the Oregon Fire Mutual Aid System, ODF, and all our response partners. So this does signify a significant concern in terms of the amount of fires we're seeing, where we're seeing those fires in and around communities. So thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Mariana. Next slide. So are we ready, and where do we need to advance fire protection to keep pace with the challenge we have before us? And the complete coordinated system, as you've heard, is the term we use for Oregon's response system. And Mariana Ruiz-Temple is the State Fire Marshal, myself as Chief of Fire Protection for ODF, are just 2 of the state players that lead this effort. But we can't do this alone. The complete and coordinated system takes our contractors, our federal partners, our local fire departments who respond to the majority of our fires here in the urban interface across the state, which are largely volunteer organizations, the landowner coordination that takes place, for example, in the Labor Day fires last year, where we were able to procure locally over 450 pieces of equipment to help dig those lines we needed. That's our complete and coordinated system, and it takes all our partners to be successful, and that is solidly in place. And we've been exercised to the extreme over the years, as we all know that. And we have areas to advance, and the governor's office and the legislature has taken action on that. We'll close with a note on that towards the end. Fire protection starts with prevention. And for the last month, we've dedicated our effort towards that energy and declared the month of May as Wildfire Awareness Month. We are fortunate to have a nonprofit organization leading this effort, Keep Oregon Green, in the state of Oregon, and they do a great job amplifying and promoting our prevention messages, and they're with us all summer long. Aggressive initial attack, particularly here for ODF, is our highest priority work to minimize the size, cost, and resource loss from wildfires, and that's our focused attention. And we are resourced accordingly to get there with recent investments from the legislature. We've hired and are training seasonal firefighters and quickly got to the fire lines, given those numbers of fires, over 300 close to 300 responded to already this year. Early detection in this matter is absolutely key, so continue to expand and robust detection systems, including our cameras and aviation assets. And then more and more importantly becomes our aviation assets, which gives us that air support needed for the ground troops who ultimately dig the line at the end of the fire hose, putting those fires out, and need that air support. And we're privileged to have the contract base we have in the state of Oregon to support that effort. Mariana, I turn to you to bring us home.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Preparing for wildfire. Thank you. So in terms of preparing for wildfire, as Doug indicated, we do rely on that complete coordinated system, working with our partners, local, state, feds, as well as our emergency management partners. But I think the biggest thing that we are looking at is really transitioning from the concept of a seasonal fire season and more of a year. There is cause to be alarmed with the types of fuels we're seeing and the potential of this busy fire season. I mean, really looking at it holistically, and I think that will be one of our most important preparation points. Pre-positioning of resources. The Oregon Department of Forestry Office of State Fire Marshal have worked over the years to talk about how do we fill those gaps in terms of underserved communities or undercapacity communities, and how do we leverage those relationships either in pre-positioning of severity resources. I look towards our wheatlands where if a fire were to occur on those, we know that those fires pick up quickly and can consume large amount of acres quickly. And so looking at how do we either pre-position resources, use non-traditional structural resources, and putting plans in place so that we fill that gap early. Looking to our wildland partners, like I indicated, and really using that complete coordinated system early and often, and ensuring that we're hitting these fires at initial attack before they become large fires and impact our communities. Next slide. The Oregon Fire Mutual Aid System. So this is the system that the Office of State Fire Marshal uses as part of that complete coordinated system. This system is happening every day. This is your local fire districts and departments that are responding. 92% of Oregonians live in a fire district, and when these types of fires impact those communities, these are the structural resources that come to bear. This system is made up of 305 fire departments or districts. These are the 13,000 firefighters that serve Oregon. And about 70% of those are volunteers. So when we take a look at the capacity that is brought with that, there are needs to ensure that we have mutual aid agreements with other states. We are leaning in with both state of California and Washington. We do that every year. We're continuing to engage with the Office of Emergency Management and EMAC. And really evaluating the capacity. The state of Oregon is lucky in that we can mobilize 15 to 20 strike teams, so around 250 to 300 firefighters pretty quickly. But what we've seen over the last 10 years is those fires are longer duration fires, more complex fires, and the amount of capacity that we have in Oregon to staff those fires in maybe 1, 2, and 3 that happen quickly. We really need to be taking a look at how we increase capacity, how we leverage those partnerships. And so the Office of State Fire Marshal is continuing to work and lean towards how we work with other states and bringing in those non-traditional resources. Next slide. So path forward, I think that, my colleague talked a little bit about those investments that were made during the January e-board. We continue to anchor in and look towards the Governor's Wildfire Council recommendations as the vehicle to implement much needed investments, strategies, and programs, and how Oregonians look at fire, how we prepare for fire, how we build resiliency, and really taking a holistic approach that these types of fires we're seeing are not the type of fires we saw maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And so those investments and strategies that we're looking towards now is hoping to build a more resilient Oregon for the future. And we need those investments in response, risk reduction, and resilience, and really understanding that it takes all of us. There is a education component about how as a public we live with fire, and the reality that we will be living with fire in Oregon. And I will hand it over to my colleague to close that out.
Mariana, I think you did great there. I've got nothing to add. Thanks for the report, as always. Looking forward to working with you as we have throughout the fire season. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
I think I'm up next. Could we go to the next slide? Hi. All right, can we get the slide deck back up? Hi, everybody. I'm Harry Estev. I'm the Communications Manager at Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. And where there's fire, there's smoke, and that's where we come in. The 2020 fires blanketed Oregon in smoke for days, causing some of the worst air quality in memory in this state. So I'm going to just take a couple minutes to talk about how we track smoke from wildfires and inform the public about air conditions and what steps the public can take when the air quality is bad. So starting with our air quality monitoring network, DEQ maintains just above 60 air quality monitoring stations around the state. And these monitor for a handful of pollutants, but including particulate matter, which is what we find in smoke, and that's what causes bad air quality. We offer this information on real-time basis through our air quality index, which you can find, and I'll post some links after I'm done. There's also the Oregon Air phone app, which is just a really quick way to see what conditions are like. And those are color-coded to show, green means it's good, but as you get to other colors, it talks about, it's bad if you have pre-existing conditions or it's just pure unhealthy. And we're trying to expand the number of our stations. We have expanded recently to the coast. So we're getting readings from there. We've also gone into Eastern Oregon, and we're trying to build up our network as resources allow. Next slide, please. So there's a pretty good demonstration of what we were dealing with last year. But I want to talk about the wildfire response protocol. So when there is an event, a pretty substantial wildfire event, that triggers the protocol, and that's a big interagency gathering, through Zoom these days, where we have all the agencies that you see represented, plus others, including local public health agencies, the Oregon Health Authority, and others, National Weather Service. We go over the current conditions, which way this, what the wind is doing, what conditions are, so that we can forecast where the smoke is going to be and how bad it's going to be, at least to the greatest degree possible. And once we have that information, we make a determination as to whether we're going to issue an air quality advisory for a particular location. We work, as I said, very closely with the Oregon Health Authority. They are the experts on the health issues that smoke can cause. They have numerous resources and experts available to talk about those very issues. And so I highly recommend that you check out some of their websites on smoke and health. And then, we kind of, every year we review what happened the previous year, and we try to make modifications, try to make things better. Next slide, please. This is kind of the go-to source for all smoke information. We've upgraded the Oregon Smoke Blog this year to make it more user-friendly. It's just a little bit simpler to read and look at. We've also made it mobile friendly because there was a large uptick in the amount of mobile phone users who would go onto the site. And we're also working on developing a Spanish language version of this, which we hope to have in place by the time serious wildfire season kicks in. We already translate our air quality advisories and our news releases into Spanish. And so that's kind of my presentation. I just want to say that we're always looking for ways to improve our public information on wildfire smoke. Always happy to hear suggestions. And as always, DEQ wants to thank you folks, the news outlets, because you perform that crucial public service of informing the public during emergencies. And we want to help you out as much as we can. We have experts on hand to talk about smoke as needed. As I mentioned before, Oregon Health Authority also has experts available to talk about health effects. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Harry. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Phelps. I'm the director of the Oregon Office of Emergency Management. If we can go to the next slide, please. There we are. I want to provide an overview of what role the Office of Emergency Management and the State Emergency Coordination Center in general plays during emergencies and disasters. We really serve as the hub of the coordination for state agency resources and coordinating the operations of state agencies in support of our cities, our counties, the tribes here in Oregon, as well as integrating our federal partners into response operations as they impact wildfires. Through the State Emergency Coordination Center, we also have access to resources from outside of Oregon and other states through the Emergency Management Assistance Compact and several other mutual aid agreements that extend not only to all 50 states and U.S. territories, but into Canada as well. Over the number of disasters we've had over the past several years, Oregon's become rather proficient at using the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. In fact, last year during our wildfire response, we had non-firefighting resources from as far away as Massachusetts come into Oregon to help our response and initiate our recovery efforts. We had over 260 individuals from 15 states here in Oregon assisting with things from volunteer and donations management to search and rescue operations and recovery planning. We also serve as a conduit for accessing non-fire federal resources through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. As most of you know, we are continuing to recover from the wildfires from last September, which means we have a number of FEMA staff and leadership already on the ground, pre-positioned here in the state heading into this year's firefighting season. We have a federal coordinating officer who's already been designated for the state of Oregon, and I look forward to working with that individual should the need arise to tap into additional non-firefighting federal resources. Next slide, please. It's important to note, too, that emergency response and disaster response doesn't just fall to one specific agency or discipline, and disasters don't align with jurisdictional boundaries. That's why it's really important that we have our organization established using emergency support functions, or ESFs. Each of these emergency support functions have a designated lead state agency or agencies to handle the coordination and plan operational response associated with their emergency support function. Next slide, please. This ESF structure, it's duplicated at the local level, the county level, and the federal level to ensure that alignment and integration of operational responsibilities. I want to point out a couple of our ESF partners. ESF 1 transportation is led, as one might imagine, by the Department of Transportation here in Oregon, and they facilitate evacuation and road closures, which become really important during our large, impactful fires. ESF 6, Mass Care, is led by the Oregon Department of Human Services. They coordinate statewide operations for sheltering and evacuee support in close coordination with local partners, the American Red Cross, and other nonprofit and voluntary organizations. Our National Guard, of course, Emergency Support Function 18, provide a variety of roles from firefighting to medevac support to helping with traffic control checkpoints to keep folks safe during our wildfire response. Other state agencies like the Oregon Health Authority, Department of Administrative Services, the Oregon State Police, Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy, and dozens of others play critical roles, often behind the scenes, to reduce the risk of fires and help keep Oregonians safe. Next slide, please. I want to close just by noting that there are things that we all as Oregonians can do to reduce our risk. I'm asking every Oregonian to plan on being a disaster survivor. Disasters are inevitable, but there are things that we can do to reduce our individual risk, our family's risk, and the risk of our communities, and prepare for whatever bad day lies ahead. There are things we can do to ensure we have the supplies that we need at home, when we're traveling, when we're on the road, and when we're at school or at work. And taking care of your entire family, to include pets, is paramount to ensuring you can weather a wildfire or other emergency that may arise. Having adequate supplies of food, water, medication, first aid kits, and critical, vital, important, irreplaceable documents is also important as part of your preparedness posture. We also encourage Oregonians to sign up for emergency alerts. Most emergencies and disasters are public information emergencies. Your ability to get timely and accurate information through a variety of channels, whether it's opt-in notification systems, through social media, or of course through our partnerships with the traditional media, can really empower Oregonians to write their survival story and weather whatever Mother Nature may throw at us this fire season. I want to note that there are things that every Oregonian should be doing today before they're impacted by an emergency or a disaster to empower themselves to be disaster survivors and not disaster victims. We've heard a pretty bleak outlook for what the wildfire season holds for us this year. And in fact, it's more of a year-round fire season now as opposed to something that's marked on a calendar. So taking some steps today to prepare for what you and your family may need during an emergency or disaster will make a huge difference when or if you're impacted by a wildfire. With that, I'll turn it back over to Liz.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks everyone for presenting. We're going to switch gears a little bit and move into media access. So Yasmin, if we can go to the next slide. Perfect. And I know we're a little bit behind schedule, so I'm going to do my best to be efficient. But just wanted to kind of set the stage as we move into this conversation about media access, which is very, very important. So some of the things that we think about, and from the governor's office perspective and from the statewide perspective, safety is always going to be our top priority when it comes to media access to wildfires. That means safety of our first responders, safety of the public, and of course, your safety as reporters. So keeping safety in mind, and if it is safe to do so, we always want to provide equitable access to cover wildfires. And we will coordinate with you on how best to do that, but our objective is really to provide equitable access. And in doing so, we're going to lay out some processes that will help, that you can follow, that will help ensure that we have equitable access. So working with the appropriate comms person, PIO person, is going to be really key in making sure that all reporters have the same access to cover wildfires as each other. In terms of accuracy, we, as you can tell, when it comes to wildfires, there's a lot of coordination that goes on. And so in terms of getting you information, we always want to be as accurate as possible and as transparent as possible, but recognizing that we do, different agencies, different jurisdictions are often working on different timelines, especially when it comes to things like stats in terms of, for example, acreage lost, houses lost, lives lost. We have to coordinate with different agencies. We have to integrate different systems. So we always want to get you the most accurate information, but sometimes that might take a little bit more time. And in terms of timeliness, of course, we understand that you're under deadlines, and we will always do our best to help meet those deadlines. Sometimes with emerging issues, we may not have all the information right away, and we may not always be able to meet those deadlines, especially when we're dealing with life safety issues. But our commitment is that we will do our best and to get you the information that we have when we can. And then just in terms of coordination, I think you can tell from the presentation we just received, there's a lot of coordination between different agencies, different expertise, different jurisdictions when it comes to wildfire response. So just as that coordination is happening on the operations side, it's also happening on the communication side. So kind of a good rule of thumb, if you have specific questions about local issues or specific fires or specific fire operations, that typically will be a Department of Forestry or a state fire marshal question. But if you're looking at kind of the bigger picture, kind of the statewide picture in terms of covering all the bases from evacuation to transportation to mass care to sheltering, OEM, Office of Emergency Management, is probably going to be your best bet as an initial entry point. So just wanted to reiterate that we appreciate the work that you do as reporters and providing information to Oregonians, and we will do everything we can to get you access access when it's safe and appropriate to do so. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joy and Allison to go over some specifics.
Thanks, Liz. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to work with yet, I'm Joy Krosick. I'm the Public Affairs Director for the Oregon Department of Forestry. Next slide, please. So also in the interest of time and making sure we provide ample time for questions, I'll kind of roll through this high level. So we anchor into the National Interagency Media Guidelines for Wildland Fires, which is the same guidance our federal partners use regarding media access to wildfire incidents. As Liz mentioned, the focus is media access as broadly, equitably as possible so that you all can do the critically important work of making sure that the public is informed so they can stay safe. There are some parameters we do need to work within, primarily to look out for your safety, the safety of any folks who are out there with you as escorts or assistants, and for those who are engaged in operations on the ground. So if you're looking to cover a fire, whether it's a larger one being managed by an incident management team, or if it's a smaller local fire, you will need approval to enter the fire perimeter, and you'll need, oh, my slide left, but that's fine. And you'll need an escort. That may not necessarily be a PIO. It's up to the commander of that particular incident to make that determination. My colleague from State Fire Marshal will go into more detail about who to contact and when to discuss access. Inside the fire perimeter, you'll also need safety brief and personal protective equipment. Much of that PPE would be available at larger incidents, so pants, shirt, gloves, all the necessities. That might not be possible at smaller incidents. And the one item to be aware of that typically we can't provide are boots. So the recommendation would be that when you're making that initial contact and discussing access to the fire, to make sure to ask about PPE and availability, so you can be all ready when you get there to head within the fire perimeter. Next slide, please. So while the goal is maximum access, there are key reasons that access may be denied. The top of the list is safety. Safety firefighters or others, if there's the potential that could be compromised, your access may be declined, denied, delayed. For example, if there's the potential for, some sort of extreme fire behavior, and there are those warnings that the conditions are right for that, it may be that it has to be delayed, your visit would have to be delayed by a day or till later in the day, just to make sure that we're not putting you or putting our folks into a situation where they're in danger. Another reason for denial would be if there are ongoing investigations or incident operations where bringing in non-fire personnel could compromise those operations or complicate them. And the last key one is we have authority over the lands within our jurisdiction, but we won't override the access determination of another jurisdiction. And for ODF in particular, a lot of the lands we protect are private lands. So that would be up to the private landowner to make the determination as to whether they would like to allow media access to their personal property. other situations be tribal entities, or if local law enforcement has made a determination on access for an area. And with that, I will hand it over to Allison at State Fire Marshal to close us out.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm not going to be able to join you via camera because of bandwidth issues, but I do at least get to meet you virtually over audio today. And maybe a brief touch on access and some stories is, really as we move forward, if we are capturing some of those videos or stories in areas where folks have experienced home loss, double checking with folks that the folks have been notified that they've lost their structures, just to make sure all of our bases are covered. And so I'm going to close this out and try to get us to that question and answer piece. Along with the resources and the slides from today, we have also prepared essentially a contact sheet on which agency to contact and when, and in what situation around what topic. So, and these are not general inboxes, right? These are our cell phones. So you are able to get a hold of us, and then we can then help get you to either the public affairs folks or public information folks on the ground for the fire, or then connect you if it's not directly impacting our agency. So for Oregon Department of Forestry, Office of State Fire Marshal, and for our federal partners, that is really where we can help you with that on-the-ground fire information, right? So if we are not on the ground, we know the public information officers who are. For our federal folks, a lot of times what will happen is starting with the local national forest or with one of our state offices, we can connect you with the PIO that's on the ground there to get you those up-to-date information, as well as around fire situation, fire prevention, as well as, fire investigations on the ODF side of things. As Liz alluded to, OEM is going to be the facilitator for some of those other state agencies, as well as evacuation and recovery pieces. There's the contact list. So this is, I'm not going to read the whole thing. This has come to you all in a PDF with hyperlinks to the emails and to all of the social handles. We included DEQ in there, not only for smoke impacts, but any other environmental impacts to our residents here in Oregon. So I really wanted to close out with a thank you to you all. As we heard today, we might be in for a rough fire season. The conditions are there. We're trying to prevent the ignitions right now. And so please continue to help us tell our story around prevention. Please help, tell that story around what folks can do to prepare themselves, what folks can be doing to prevent ignitions, and then also that timely and efficient information when we are in a fire incident. So with that, I will hand it over to Liz, and I look forward to answering any questions. Thanks, y'all.
Great, thank you so much. Yasmin, could we stop the screen share? Oh, perfect, thank you. And just a reminder, I'll send the contact sheet that we just shared and the slides to all the reporters who've joined us today, so you have that information. So we're gonna go ahead and get into Q&A. I know we have a couple people with questions so far. Let's go ahead and start with Gary Warner with EO Media. Are you there, Gary?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm the first to unmute today, so I get to be slow. Thank you very much, first of all, for this presentation and for everybody's time. My question would be perhaps for OEM about the upgrade or the additional air resources that are going to be available this year. Last year, there was an issue that OEM didn't feel it was that important of an issue, but that 7 of the state's largest National Guard helicopters, the Chinooks, had been sent overseas as part of a military operation. Are those aircraft back? Are you adding additional aircraft? Are you working with Erickson? Where are you going to get these additional air assets from?
Hey, thanks so much, Gary. I'm actually going to see if maybe Doug wants to speak to the aerial firefighting resource question.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll kick it off, and if you have anything to add relative to military, that would be great. The first line of defense on aviation is investments in what we call our severity dollars. So the legislature and landowners contribute to a $5 million severity investment where we procure aviation assets and place them around the state. And that includes, we have about 30 aircraft on standby ready during the fire season made available through these investments. When fires ignite and large fires establish on the landscape, we bring additional resources on and focus those on those new fires. The important component there of those 30 aircraft is that that's our initial attack resource. So we'll add aviation assets, and these are mainly contracted assets. We have one small fixed wing for observation here at the state. When those contracted resources are fully exhausted across the nation, in Oregon, we'll pull in from across the nation, and then we'll initiate military aircraft as needed. And what happened last year was the military in Oregon has a certain set of available resources, and what they're able to do through EMAC is pull from other states' military assets. So we pulled in a significant amount from other states through the military and through the national contracting process, which is really supported at the national level through the U.S. Forest Service, BLM, other national firefighting agencies. So it's a strong aviation package.
Just to reinforce Chief Graff's comments there, the National Guard does have resources available, Black Hawk helicopters for both fire suppression and medevac capability, as well as a Chinook helicopter out of Pendleton for firefighting capabilities as well. And as Chief Graff mentioned, we have the capacity to reach out to other states should we need additional firefighting aircraft from other National Guard resources, really anywhere in the west half of the United States.
I just want to make sure I'm not missing something here. You said you have a as in one Chinook that's available out of Pendleton. Where are the Oregon National Guard's other Chinooks?
Thanks for that, Gary. I don't have the force laydown for the National Guard Chinooks where they're deployed, but right now what the National Guard has indicated they have available is the one Chinook and then the two Blackhawks for firefighting suppression.
So you don't know if they're in Oregon or in Afghanistan or in Somalia or...
Yeah, Gary, I don't know the force laydown right now for the National Guard aerial resources where they are deployed, but we can get back to you with that information.
Okay, I'd appreciate that.
Yep.
Thanks, Gary. Let's go to Lindsay Nadrich at COIN.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Some of the power companies held a briefing this morning too, said they're looking at wildfire season very differently. There were some areas last year where power didn't get shut off soon enough, given the wind event that was predicted. What are you guys doing from that perspective? Are you going to be working closer with power companies to shut off power if we see an event coming, or what can be done differently this year given what we saw in that historic wildfire last year as far as communication between different agencies and taking more preventative steps?
Lindsay, Doug Graff here, Department of Forestry. I can offer a first response there. Certainly power companies are engaging more with the agencies in response. And we've seen that on multiple fronts with tabletop exercises, with briefings relative to how we share information, weather events coming. The determination for public safety power shutdown is within the responsibility of the power companies themselves. But certainly with my experience rolling into 2021 fire season, I've seen broader engagement across the board on the prevention and readiness front.
Doug, this is Mariana. I might just add, so Mariana with the Office of State Fire Marshal. Lindsay, that's a great question and one that I think we are all looking towards this season. Two things have changed that I would highlight. One is the PUC just implemented temporary rulemaking that speaks specifically to the hydraulics of how they would make that decision, when they would make that decision, and how power companies must engage with responders. And so I see that as a good movement forward. They're also looking towards permanent rulemaking. So I think that's a really good stakeholder engaged process that we can all be part of. And then third, Senate Bill 762, which is the governor's omnibus bill, speaks specifically to requirements of PUC. So all good movement towards what's a very important component of response, which is how they engage and how responders get to be part of that conversation.
And if I could ask one follow-up, just reiterate for me kind of the biggest lesson learned from that historic wildfire season, and what, I don't know if you could, like, what's one big thing that will look different this year because of what the state went through?
This is Mariana. What I would say, just by virtue of their rulemaking, is that the acknowledgement, and I don't want to speak for PUC or the power companies, but that there needs to be a process, that it needs to be stakeholder driven, and that the outcome needs to be how we can improve in that space. And those temporary rulemakings did go into effect last week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Let's go next to Monica Samayoa with OPB.
Hi, this question might be for Andrew. So you mentioned that there's an increase in, proficient in a response during emergencies and notifying the public. Were there any upgrades given that, the City of Talent didn't get any notifications? I know there were some areas in Clackamas County as well. And also wondering, is it only through mobile devices that people can get notifications? What about people that just don't have that kind of technology to receive that?
Thanks for that, Monica. We've made significant investments as a state to allow the counties to opt in to use these systems if they didn't have an existing mass notification system. We've contracted with a company called Everbridge to provide that system to every county in the state. And again, many counties, even last year, had access to a mass notification system. Whether they used it, how they used it, varied from county to county. There are a number of ways that these notification systems can provide information to residents. There are opt-in systems where folks can choose to be notified and receive a text message. They can receive email notifications, and they can receive voice calls if they have a landline phone through those opt-in systems. Outside of those opt-in systems, we also ensure that every county has access to what's called IPAWS, the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. This is a FEMA nationwide system that is used for things like Amber Alerts. So if you've ever had an Amber Alert on your phone, it uses that technology to get that information out to Oregonians or anyone in the country based on the location of their cellular device and which cell tower it is receiving a signal from. So we have a little bit of control over, geographically speaking, where those alerts are received. So through IPAWS, the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, we can use wireless emergency alerts to hit people on their cell phones, wherever they are. Then we can also utilize the Emergency Alert System, or EAS. And that's something that more folks are familiar with when they receive the alerts or they hear the testing tones on their radio or on TV. And of course, I want to thank OPB for being a state leader in the emergency alert system process. It's also really important to remember that no mass notification system is perfect. These systems rely on humans to initiate the alerts. In some cases, they rely on folks to ensure they've signed up for alerts or have enabled their alerts on their mobile device. And it also relies on technological infrastructure, cell towers and networks. Sometimes that infrastructure is impacted by the emergency or disaster. So making sure that we're using a combination of high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech alerts like door-to-door notifications, dynamic message boards on highways to provide information to folks. We need to make sure that emergency managers have all of those tools at their disposal and that Oregonians are familiar with how their community plans to communicate to them during an emergency. Is there a website? Are there social media feeds? Will they be utilizing those mass notification systems? It varies from county to county. But just as we're encouraging emergency managers to use every tool in their toolbox to do equitable, accessible, rapid notifications, we also want to make sure that Oregonians know how and where to get that information.
Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. I want to recognize that we're at time right now. It's 2 p.m. I know that Andrew can at least stay on for another 5 minutes. So I want to give our principals the opportunity to log out now if you need to. So Jason, Constantine, Harry, Doug, Mariana, if you need to exit the Zoom room, please feel free to do so. And I will try to get us through 1 or 2 more questions. We'll go to about 2:05 if that works. So for those who need to exit, please feel free to do so, and we'll try to see if we can make it through a couple more questions. So let's go to Sarah Hurwitz next.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time.